How did humans survive as an intelligent species till the time of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes? Sure, there were herds of feral human populations that have been dumbed down by the simian virus over the course of hundreds of years, but May and her human group have survived almost nearly untouched in mental acuity by the apocalyptic virus. So here in this video we will discuss in detail how these human survivors were not feral, where their base of operations are, the way they would have lived for hundreds of years, and if this was even possible. Basically, they are like the vault people of Fallout. Or maybe not. Anyway, let's get to it. To begin with, the simian flu pandemic, also known as the simian flu crisis, was a devastating viral outbreak that nearly wiped out humanity and led to the intelligent evolution of all apes. This pandemic originated from the drug testing at Genesis Laboratories, the ALZ-113, which aimed to develop a cure for Alzheimer's disease. 5 years into the outbreak, about 50% of the human population had died out due to virus, and the ensuing chaos, including wars and civil strife. A decade after the initial outbreak, human civilization had collapsed. Although the human race or the species survived, a significant portion of the global population succumbed to either the simian flu or to the societal collapse that followed. 2 years after the onset of the human-ape war, the simian flu mutated, no longer killing humans, but instead targeting the speech cells and structures of the human brain. This new neurodegenerative disease, a strain, caused infected survivors to lose their speech abilities and revert them to a more primitive intelligence level. By the time of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, the evolved apes increased in numbers and formed various clans, villages, and different types of societies, spreading all over North America, as far as we know. Meanwhile, the descendants of surviving humans infected by the mutated simian flu lived as primal hunter-gatherers, probably with the same kind of intellect as Neanderthals. But then, we found out in Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes that there were some humans who were either immune to the mutated strains, or they continued to survive in isolated settlements and underground structures. By this time, humans have gradually thinned out in population, to the point where the apes of Noah's clan call them echoes and have not the slightest clue about the history and what has happened in the past. So as we can see, May and the other human survivors were quite intelligent, including Trevathan. Well, it seems that May has a 21st century pre-simian flu speech ability, and so did the others. They also have quite a good understanding on technology and science, which tells us they might have been completely unaffected and are as smart as humans ever were. So before we go on discussing the possibility of living inside underground societies or how they survive for hundreds of years, for generations, and also going over the details of resources needed, we first have to find out where their bunkers or vaults were, or maybe their settlements. Also, how many were there? So in the end of the movie, May travels to a plain area where a satellite base is located, still operational and inhabited after 300 years. She gives the decipher key to the people there, who use it to activate a set of massive satellite dishes and successfully contact other settlements, giving hope to a restoration of human civilization. The place there is none other than the Carl G. Jansky Very Large Array in central New Mexico, on the plains of San Augustine in the United States of America. They then made contact with other survivors' base in Fort Wayne in Indiana in just a short while, which means that there could be many other places lying around all over the Earth's wild country of the US and possibly all over the world. So now to the big question. If they survived underground, how big would the generational bunkers be? And how much resources would be needed to sustain a significant population for quite a few generations? Well, the basic needs would of course be water, food, energy, space, and clothing. Then comes the secondary aspects, which are societal rules, a common language, and of course good education. If they were to survive underground in such enclosed systems, the bigger the availability of space, the better. More room for movement and activity makes for a healthier environment. So think of this as more like people in several connected complexes, with each being self-sufficient but intercooperating, just like the vaults of Fallout, as I said earlier. Also, surviving underground is more ideal with the existence of vast systems of caves, which means the possibility of access to vast subterranean reservoirs of fresh water. Of course, recycling still is probably important and might take place, but depending on location, natural reservoirs might be way more convenient and reliable. Then with respect to food, everyone there is essentially vegetarian, especially with animals taking too much space and creating havoc in a closed system. The most effective agricultural methods would be hydroponics and also aquaponics, generating food that requires little space, and their biomass can be utilized in their entirety. Also, most of the energy will go towards food production in the form of artificial lighting, which is obvious since they are on the ground. To exist for generations on end, there is no way anyone can store enough food to last that long, or even preserve the food that has been stored, since food will degrade over time. Then comes energy, which might be limited, but in just that an enough amount so as to power up the radio array, or also some makeshift generators, or maybe connected to a nearby hydroelectric reservoir or batteries preserved in dry cold storage, all of which would be needed to power the auxiliary systems like air filtration, lights, temperature control, etc. All of which points to one oddity in the movie, and that is, how is the technology not degraded or rusted after all those many generations? With the director in a couple of interviews kind of accepting the fact that it had been around 300 years since the war for the Planet of the Apes, and after all those years, is survival even possible in small spaces without chaos, mutiny, and depression? When talking about technology, let's begin with infrastructure. Concrete can last about 50 to 100 years, according to the Portland Cement Association, but it depends upon the thickness of the slabs. The thicker, the longer it will last. Metals would rust faster and would be corroded in a few decades. Like all things, even wiring materials degrade over time. Rubber used in some old wires can become brittle and break away, exposing the underlying metal wire, which will rust. This exposure can result in short circuits, posing immediate risk of fire or electrocution. Therefore, wires would only last maybe 50 years. When we go deeper into the semiconductors, some of the silicon chips may last only 10 years, but generally the industry is fairly conservative and creates longer lasting ones, with many of these silicon chips being able to last for 100 to 200 years. But all of this points to the fact that it is highly unlikely and improbable they were living underground. So while we did see the survivors inside an underground base, the more logical conclusion may be that it is something quite different. It could be that they were just taking precautions of May coming back with the satellite encryption key. Maybe they were afraid that May might be carrying a new strain of the simian flu. While in normal times they may be living normally outside in the settlement, maybe an outside settlement, a village. Think about it, the ancestors of these people might have used one of the underground bases or shelters to survive for maybe a decade or two, outlasting the virus and maybe the barbaric survivors after that, and then they would have come out to the surface and restarted living in a small settlement, and might have been one of the few safe harbors for humans immune to the virus to come and stay and rebuild. After a few generations, their descendants would then begin to start salvaging for lost tech in order to try contacting other humans and begin a new age. So my point is, complete and total isolation for a few generations would breed a totally different and weaker type of human, and maybe them living above ground would make more sense. It wouldn't have been possible for people who have been born and lived their entire lives under the surface, probably with chronic nutrient and vitamin deficiency as well as no experience of the outside world, to suddenly have the know-how and ability to traverse hundreds of miles to the coastline to get the encryption key. Never mind the stamina and physical resilience to be in the open world after a lifetime inside a hole. If an iPad kid can't make his way down the street to a nearby store with proper directions in the modern world, there is no way a subterranean culture can conquer the landscapes in a post-apocalyptic future. So my best guess would be that they are a part of a remote settlement of humans above ground which are immune and free from the virus, maybe due to the remoteness of the region and isolation, living above ground for so long that maybe the virus is now ineffective in piercing the cell membranes, propagating and infecting humans. And also, when we see the satellite base, they might just be using that for communications, and it's not actually their vault or bunker. It might just be that they were using that base for contacting other human survivors spread around the world to create a new civilization. And that is where I think the story will pick up in the sequel to the Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. So that's the video right here. Thank you for watching. That's basically me explaining how did intelligent humans survive in the Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and maybe they were not living underground, and maybe they had settlements above ground. Maybe. If you like this video, then watch this other one as well, and if you want to browse for other ape content, then check out our channel. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care, guys.